He had a leg that dragged, and he was singing a song as he worked in the stables and was dancing and dragging his leg, because the truth is that most enslaved Americans did not get any or adequate medical care. And so T.D. Rice sees him and he thinks, this is an interesting character. And so he goes back up to the Bowery in New York City and he presents this new character that he performs in blackface using soot and burnt corks, so literally burning down corks from wine bottles, putting it on his face. And he performs the song Jim Crow, which talks about wheeling about or spinning about in blackface. And the crowd went insane. This was largely an all-white male audience, primarily laborers, working class people, Irish immigrants. And they rushed the stage and made him perform it again and again and again and learn the dance beside T.D. Rice. And one thing that's fascinating is there's a painting in the Museum of the City of New York of this moment, and it's always been held up as the moment when minstrelsy in blackface was born, and it explodes in New York City, becomes the #1 entertainment form in the United States, and then it ricochets globally throughout the English-speaking world. But when I look at the painting, I notice because all of the people who had rushed the stage and were dancing alongside it, it's also the moment that amateur blackface is born, because Americans were so infatuated with this character that they wanted to know how to perform it as well. What does the character do? The character was dressed like a stableman. He was wearing very tattered clothing, rags, and the blackface would have been on his face, his arms, his feet, and he was wearing interesting sandals. One of the toes were ripped off of the right leg, and the toe cap is ripped off. The character Jim Crow is supposed to be incredibly submissive, bumbling, happy-go-lucky, frolicking through the fields, and overjoyed to be enslaved, because the white supremacist idea at the time was that slavery provided every need or want for an enslaved person, which obviously we know is a completely horrific interpretation of what slavery is. Jim Crow had a foil, zip. They unfortunately used a negative, derogatory word that starts with a C, and so this Zip character was supposed to be a blackface urban dandy. His clothing was always mismatched. He would get words wrong. He would try to be a black politician, a black abolitionist. Sometimes he was portrayed as a black professor or a black doctor. Quite often than not, he was a black pastor. And so together you had this damned if you do, damned if you don't, whether you were a representation of a black enslaved person who was in the American South and enslaved and happy to be enslaved, or if you had this free black person in the urban North who just could not assimilate or master American culture no matter what they did.
One of the things that helps spread the minstrel show is the printing press.
Yes.
Because amateurs could learn how to be minstrels. There were leaflets that you could print to advertise your show, the newspaper ads you could publish, and instructional how-to books. So tell us what was in those instructional books. What were they teaching you that you needed to know to perform in blackface?
Yes, so in the 1840s, 1850s, 1860s, America has Americans on the move, whether that's to the gold rush, to the Mexican-American War, and then especially the American Civil War. And the minstrels, who are these global superstars, realize we can't tour to all of these places where we have demand, but what we can do is use the new technology of rapid printing, of photography, of lithography, and write down explicitly how to step-by-step guides to perform blackface on your own. And this is really radical, because before that, if you wanted to go to a minstrel show, you pretty much had to go to New York City or hope that they came to your town. And so you might see a show once a year if you were outside of New York. If you were in New York, it might be a weekly part of your life. But now suddenly in these how-to guides that would tell you how to replicate stereotypes on your face, overdraw your lips, overdraw your eyes. They used made-up nonsensical language that disturbingly, most Americans could understand and replicate because of just how pervasive minstrelsy was. And the title of the book, Darkology, comes from these books directly, and it meant the study of learning to try and represent Black life in a humorous way from these printed how-to guides. And so it was very much an insider term amongst the amateur and professional minstrels. And what is so horrifying about it is now you are no longer just being a consumer or viewer of minstrelsy. You yourself, as a child, as a teacher, as a soldier, are reading these books, studying them, memorizing them, selecting jokes, selecting gags. And now
What
you
up,
yourself
Jason?
are embodying Blackness as you find it funny.
Yo, we in
And so
San
you're
Jose?
taking ownership in these new characters, and that is what made it destructive.
The how-to books also taught you
Where in Los
how
Angeles?
to apply blackface. It's like foundation makeup, to match the coloring that you wanted.
It's an entire commercial empire. So Stein's Makeup was one of the largest. They were a theatrical makeup company. And you'll actually find today when you go into Halloween stores that a lot of these blackface makeup companies still exist today for Halloween costume makeup and also for clown makeup.
Let's talk about how the Elks Club, which was one of those fraternal organizations, it was officially called the Benevolent and Protective Order of the Elks. How did they become like a center and a major spreader of amateur blackface shows?
Slavery was a grand old party because that's what it was supposed to be telling you. It's pro-slavery propaganda.
I want to ask you about the Works Progress Administration, the WPA. This was a very progressive idea to create an administration during the Great Depression that would basically take laborers, writers, theater companies, and keep them alive during a time when everybody was going broke. It was hard. It was hard to live, hard to survive. But the WPA also had a branch that was devoted to disseminating music and to helping theaters. So, what role did the WPA play in disseminating minstrel songs to schools?
It is an amazing concept when you think about it, putting millions of Americans to work in terms of architecture, music, dance, etc., painting. It was a segregated organization, and what you're talking about is what I term basically a blackface bailout that happened during the Great Depression. So all of those publishing companies that started in the late 19th century and continued to rise in popularity through the Great Depression were under financial strain. And FDR and the Works Progress Administration, one of their main goals was not just to put people back to work, but to preserve American heritage. And so they felt that it would be critical